Hello, dear friends. My name is Vasyl Pekhno. I'm a Ukrainian journalist, and I invite all of you to watch this latest update on Ukrainian battle map situation. As of August the 22nd of August. So please join, watch this video, like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and leave your comments just below the video. Let's begin our overview. What's happening in the direction of Novopavlivka and Pokrovsk? This is probably the most important topic of the past few weeks. Well, at least for the past week and a half. Right now, there are a lot of triumphant reports, I would say, about what's happening here and what the situation is. They're writing that supposedly the Russians are almost being encircled in a huge cauldron. Look, I'll say this. To be objective, that's not true. To be objective, the Russians are still far from being in a huge cauldron. A huge cauldron would be if the Russian army were cut off, not here, in Kucheryavy Yar and in the breakthrough zone towards Novopavlivka, but if they were cut off somewhere roughly along the line, well, very schematically like this, along the entire Pokrovsk, Menorod, Kostiantynivka road, then we could talk about some fundamental changes in positions, a fundamental shift in the events happening now at the front. At the moment, however, there is no reason to talk about that. Right now, quite intense fighting is ongoing here. At present, the enemy is bringing in and continues to bring in drone units of the Rubicon type there. These are advanced units that operate drones and work with technologies, including electronic warfare, EW, electronic intelligence, ELINT, and radar systems. In fact, they have managed to bring together, let's say, under one umbrella, all the technological advancements of modern warfare that one could possibly imagine. Accordingly, regarding Pokrovsk, I urge you right away not to shout that there is a great victory here. Frankly speaking, it's still a long way off. Let's move on to the Novopavlivka direction, because here recently we can say that relative stabilization has been achieved. We are not seeing enemy advances, for example, in the territory of Zaporizhzhia region on a large scale, except for the single settlement of Temnivka, where the Russians have advanced into Zaporizhzhia. It's right here. We are not seeing significant Russian advances into the Dnipropetrovsk region, except perhaps in two areas. For example, Malivka here and Dakhne here. And in fact, the Russians are being held back at the borders of Donetsk region because there really are quite good engineering and fortification structures there, truly good ones, that can be held and used to prevent, so to speak, the advance of enemy troops deeper into the territories of Zaporizhzhia and Donetsk regions. But in the context of Novopavlivka, today I want to share some good news that was announced by the soldiers of the 5th Separate Heavy Mechanized Brigade. This is the one that used to be the 5th Tank Brigade. Now it is a heavy mechanized brigade, and they are operating in this area here, in the direction of Iskra, Andriivka, Klitsdov, and the settlement of Tolstoy. Here you see Tolstoy is still shown according to the old designation. Well, this settlement is displayed here, but in reality it is the village of Tovste in the Novopavlivka direction, which our soldiers managed to liberate, to free and actually expand their capabilities. Let's watch a video from the 5th Heavy Mechanized Brigade showing how they operate in the village of Tovste, essentially driving out the enemy forces. We can see and will now see the blue and yellow flag, which indicates that our troops are present here. Just for a moment, we'll return to the map and I'll show you that this is about 5.5 kilometers behind the lines from the positions that are now considered the gray or red zone. This means that such local counteroffensive tactical actions have been carried out by our troops in this direction. Accordingly, we see strikes on those positions, on those houses where the Russians have gotten stuck or holed up in Tovsta. Our troops are driving them out. And in fact, we can talk about a certain continuation, a kind of ongoing stabilization of the front in the Novopavlivka area of responsibility of our armed forces of Ukraine. Although the enemy does not stop in its attempts to try to break through into Dnipropetrovsk region, to try to break through into Zaporizhzhia, to try to establish a front along the rivers, because the rivers in this area of the Novopavlivka direction run precisely through territories adjacent to Donetsk region. These are the Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk regions. These kinds of drone drops, like the vampire type, are happening on the positions of our troops. Let's take a look at the map to see exactly where this village of Tovste is located. Tolstoy, as it is marked on the map. If you count from the gray zone, it's about, well, as you can see, almost 5 kilometers deep. It was precisely there that these actions to drive out the enemy in this sector of the enemy's responsibility were verified. Overall, it is here that we can talk about a certain advance of about 5 kilometers deep into the front line and a relative stabilization. again, without getting ahead of ourselves. Just like in the direction of Novopavlivka and Pokrovsk, a stabilization of the front by the Ukrainian Armed Forces, naturally in favor of our defenders. Next, we continue with the Zaporizhzhia front, because here the situation is somewhat different in terms of the fact that the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, stated that the Russians are now redirecting their troops from the Sumy region, in particular to the territory of Zaporizhzhia. This redeployment is taking place in a wide arc like this. For now, I continue to say that there are currently no significant large-scale transfers of enemy forces or any active changes in this situation. And I continue to point out three directly active zones that can be distinguished within the Zaporizhzhia offensive. These are Huliaipole, Orikiv, and here in the area of Kamyansk and Vasylivka. And today, we will talk more actively and in detail about Kamyansk and Vasylivka. What's the matter? The point is that Deep State has published its analytics, has shared its thoughts regarding how the enemy is advancing here and what activities they have in this area. Here is this infographic, here is this map image with, as you can see, rectangular or square red markers. What does it mean? These red markers indicate the areas where the enemy has been hit in the vicinity and in the direction of Stepnohirsk. This is an approximate number, at least an approximate number of recorded enemy losses over the past few weeks, which reflect the enemy's attempts to reach Stepnohirsk. Why is Stepnohirsk important for the enemy? I think this point is worth repeating because it keeps coming up, it provokes discussion, it troubles the minds of Ukrainians. Stepnohirsk is important, but it's not so much the town itself as the heights to the west of it that really matter. Here there are heights from which you can reach the outskirts of Zaporizhzhia. Let's take a look at where the administrative boundaries of the city of Zaporizhzhia are. So Zaporizhzhia, right here in the Balabin area, is already in fact where the districts of Zaporizhzhia begin. And from here, from the heights of Zaporizhzhia to the southern outskirts of this city, our regional center with a population of 1 million, it's actually just 20 kilometers. That's why the Russians are trying to capture Stepnohirsk. They are aiming to seize the heights to the west of Stepnohirsk. And this is exactly where they are moving right now. They are advancing along several directions. They are moving along the steppes where they previously had successes. They are moving along Plavny, the settlement of Plavny, and along the former riverbed of the Dnipro River. And also notably, they are now moving through the former territory of the Kakhovka Reservoir, which is now turning into dense forests. And we can see this precisely in this image from the Deep State map. We can clearly and precisely observe this phenomenon in these specific geolocations, noting that on the eastern former bank, or more accurately, the eastern part of the Dnipro riverbed, or indeed the eastern section of the Kakhovka Reservoir bed, the Russian forces are currently exerting significant pressure and influence in this particular area. They are trying to advance in the direction of Stepnohirsk, moving through the tree lines, moving through the fields, and are shifting their focus further and further west. As of this moment, they are actually shifting their attention to Plavny with the aim of advancing towards Stepnohirsk. Plavny is right here. This is the settlement right here, which used to be on the left bank of the Dnipro. From here, they are moving deeper into the territory. They are more successful in this area because the dense buildings here allow them to hide, to establish a foothold, and to gather forces for further advancement. And sometimes they push forward here with rather successful results, let's say, for their advance. Accordingly, in some places, Deep State notes that recently the enemy was even spotted in the central areas of the settlement of Stepnohirsk, but they were driven out from there. They were eliminated very quickly. However, a few enemy soldiers did manage to infiltrate Stepnohirsk, which in the end we can also see on the Deep State map in terms of the enemy's advance, as they are now more actively using the Plavny direction. The analysts at Deep State whom I have spoken with are rather skeptical about the prospects of the enemy's offensive in the Zaporizhzhia direction. They even say that in principle it's not that the enemy is failing, but rather that they are not recording any significant advances by the enemy in this section of the front. They rather note that the enemy is simply maintaining its usual activity here, just as it did before. Although personally, let me put it this way, I want to emphasize that apart from the area of Kamyansk and Stepnohirsk, the area near the settlement of Huliaipole in Zaporizhzhia is extremely dangerous and should be of particular concern in the near future. However, everything our troops are doing is aimed at destroying the enemy's logistics and preventing a large-scale and massive offensive by Russian occupation forces in the south of Ukraine. And it is precisely in this context that we should interpret the information shared yesterday by the Special Operations Forces regarding the sabotage operations they carried out in the settlement of Dzhankoi. Dzhankoi is an extremely important hub, a railway hub for the enemy through which the logistics of the occupiers in temporarily occupied Crimea are disrupted.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
So the Special Operations Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reported yesterday that near Dzhankoi from the 20th to the 21st of August, that is just yesterday, they struck a Russian train carrying fuel and lubricants. What did this look like? Well, first of all, wait, not this, but here it is. The destruction of enemy forces on the territory of Crimea was recorded by our resistance forces, meaning that the tank cars and the train carrying fuel and lubricants were indeed burning. As a result of these sabotage actions, the supply of the enemy's southern military group was, of course, either disrupted or, at the very least, quite seriously damaged. That is, in addition to the enemy's Crimean special operation, specifically in the Dzhankoi area, we also have what our troops did in the Tokmak area. So this is Tokmak here, and this branch leads to Dzhankoi. And all the actions that have taken place in the Volgograd, Rostov, and Krasnodar regions over the past month have likewise been identical strikes on the enemy's railway infrastructure. And therefore, special actions are being carried out to complicate the supply of the enemy's southern military group in order, let's say, to prevent further advancement of Russian troops. And you know what else helps prevent the further advance of Russian troops? Strikes on Russian oil refineries. Yesterday, Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, stated that Russia's economy is currently in quite a dire state in the sense that Ukraine's defense forces are impacting the enemy's, let's say, oil and gas lifeline. This oil and gas lifeline consists of Russian oil refineries. Yesterday, on August 21st, the Novoshakhtinsk oil refinery was struck. Novoshakhtinsk is a city located directly on the border with Ukraine and the temporarily occupied territories of Donbas. And it was here yesterday that the arrival of Ukrainian drones was recorded. The Novoshakhtinsk oil refinery was attacked. This is already the 7th oil refinery since the beginning of August, that is from August 2 to today, August 27, in 20 days, or even if we count as of yesterday, in 19 days, 7 Russian oil refineries have been attacked and successfully hit. These are oil refineries located in the Volgograd region. These are oil refineries located in the Rostov region and Krasnodar Krai, which I have already mentioned. Today, or rather yesterday, the enemy's oil refinery in Novoshakhtinsk was hit. It's important to note that Novoshakhtinsk is one of the most in-demand and most productive oil refineries in the south of the Russian Federation. Its design capacity reaches 7.5 million tons of oil per year. That's actually a huge amount, friends. It really is a very, very large amount, 7.5 million tons of oil per year. This enterprise produces gasoline. It produces fuel oil as well as marine, furnace, and diesel fuel, and directly supplies the needs of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. So what the defense forces of Ukraine are doing right now is essentially trying to disrupt enemy logistics. And that's exactly what we're seeing now in the southern regions. Dzhankoi, and not only the southern regions, by the way, Dzhankoi there, Rostov, Volgograd, Krasnodar Krai, the territory of occupied Zaporizhzhia. Let me also remind you about what's happening now. Well, at least a week ago in the Voronezh region, there were strikes on such an important settlement as Liski, or more precisely, not so much the settlement itself as the Liski railway hub in the Voronezh region, from which the railway leads to the territory of Belgorod region towards Shebekino and southward to other southern regions of the Russian Federation. So I don't want to say that we've found, some kind of Koshay's needle there or anything like that. But in fact, the armed forces of Ukraine, the defense forces of our country, have found ways to get close to the enemy's critically important infrastructure, to their logistics, to their railway logistics, which truly is the backbone of the Russian Federation's supply, the backbone of the Russian Federation's frontline supply. So on that note, I'll wrap up today's overview because there haven't been that many direct movements on the front. Right now, most of the impact is happening beyond the line, so to speak, deeper into enemy territory. And that's what today's overview is mainly about. So thank you, friends, for your attention. Take care of yourselves. All the best, and see you next time.